Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are around the world. My name is Sam. Joe, unfortunately, is not here this week. He has been running rampant, doing various different things, which we'll get on into a second. But for now, let's introduce our panel for today. We have Dr. Diane Eager. We have our International Director, Dr. John, no, I've misclassified you. It's John Mackay, and we have Craig as well. So how are you guys doing?
Well, down under here, it's great. Diane, you're a bit colder than me, I believe.
Yes, it is certainly a bit colder where I live. It's further down south and up in the mountains. So, yes, in fact, yesterday it was just utterly bleak and miserable. That was the only way to describe the weather.
All right.
We've had a couple of -5 nights during the week.
Very wet here in Queensland. And Craig, you're actually in New South Wales this week, I believe. What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm halfway in between the both of you and enjoying it up here. I'm just up for a wedding this weekend.
And what's the name of the town you're in today?
So I'm in Gloucester, New South Wales, not Gloucester, UK. Gloucester, New South Wales, a beautiful little country town just in from the coast a little bit, on the edge of the mountains, and an area I worked.
And we have a picture to explain where Joe is, don't we, Sam?
We do indeed. We have fancy graphics. So Joe has been out adventuring, and he's played his hand at being a Roman soldier. There we go. That's from the Eastern Daily Press. Look at him there. That's full regalia for you. Proper royalty, royal Romans there. Yeah, I know, very fancy. But yes, he's been running around doing various different things, and he contacted John and said, "John, I'm pooped. I need a break." So we've given him the night off. I'm hosting for this evening. So yeah, we'll make the best of it. We've got God to guide us. It's all good. John, do you want to give
I'll add one thing to that, Sam, and that is that you need to pray for Joe because he's in Norfolk at the moment. He's not only been doing sort of Christian outreach at the tents in the show, but he's been looking after his mum and dad and his sick daughter. The whole family has needed lots and lots of love and care and attention, as well as provisions. So that's what's kept Joe up to his eyeballs and pooped, as Sam says. So pray for Joe and his whole family.
Yes, indeed. We will definitely keep him in our prayers. So, John, do you want to give us a little bit of a ministry update from your neck of the woods?
Sure. Now, because I hashed up so badly last week with, I couldn't get the screens to work and all of that. And my grandson doesn't come back to the office till next week. So I'm stuck until then. So I've got lower grade technology. This is what I've been doing. Well, I get the glare off that. I shared with you a couple of weeks ago. This is just about as, can you all see that? Does that work, Diane?
Yeah, yes, I can see that.
Good.
Yes.
Now, we found this object rather fruit-like. Maybe it's a python egg, a fossilized reptile egg, or something unusual. A bit of shaped wood, as one professor suggested tentatively. And so we began excavating it, and that was the stage where it was still locked in the ground. Now, the good news is I spent last week and this week maybe 8 to 10 hours excavating the last stage with acid. So you're quite right. You'll see little spots of hydrochloric acid where I knocked the bottle over and the spots went all over me. Man, I tell you what, that stuff starts to hurt real fast. But get that off, keep on with the job. And look, here we are. We have a nice, this is hard, a nice excavated object. Now, I've got it with me here. So rather than you just looking at that screen, cleaned up, of course, from the acid, I have the real thing right here. So we have now there. All right, now you'll see it's excavated. One side is cleaned. We're not quite sure what it is yet because I haven't cleaned off the other side. Lots more acid involved. It's starting to show up down there. Is it a seed? Is it a seed pod? Is it a bit of fruit? Is it a squashed python egg? Pythons, snakes, they have those leathery. dinosaurs and that probably have mostly leathery type eggs as well. I've got quite a few dinosaur egg specimens. And to show it's an egg or a python or a fruit, we need to totally clean it. Of course, either way, it would be fabulous. And one professor said, it looks like a piece of shaped wood. Shaped by humans? Well, we don't know what it is of those four options at the moment, but the one thing we're pretty sure of, it's not just a random shaped piece that's caused by erosion. It's too neat. Whoops, there we are. It's too neat. It's got nice rounded edges. It's got shape. You take that end off, you take the other end off, and it just looks beautifully shaped. Naturally shaped, as in fruit, DNA being the guiding process, as in egg, as in a piece of carved wood. We're not sure. Hopefully by this time next week, we'll be able to do it. But for those of you who support us, thanks for those who are giving donations even now as we watch. We're grateful for it, because 2 days labor plus hydrochloric acid, 2 men involved in excavating that, it really does cost money, but the results are fabulous. Whatever that is, it looks like it shouldn't be in a Jurassic deposit at all. Keep praying. We'll keep you filled in next week.
Brilliant stuff. Fantastic. Craig, it appears that you are talking to someone. I don't think they want to be on Creation Conversations this week. So any news from your neck of the woods as well?
Craig?
Have we lost Craig?
Okay. Yes. Sorry, I just had my mic muted.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Yes. So not a lot. We went out and had a look for some fossils out in the sort of northwestern area of Tasmania during the week, and myself and Derek, one of our volunteers, in an area that's been identified. There's at least 5 known fossil sites out there, but just showing my amateur status, I guess, in some of these areas with fossils, at least we didn't really have much success. But there's been scientific papers written on little sea urchins and things being found, well inland and up in the hills there. But it's just something we couldn't find, unfortunately. But just goes to show, occasionally we can't find some of the evidences we're after.
Craig, you're in the process with Derek of building up the fossil collection in Tasmania, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So what our ultimate aim is to try and show, which you could do just from historical records, I guess, but we'd like to get the actual hard evidence in our hand, is to show how the entire state's been underwater, basically.
And you and I have talked about how to display this, and I believe we're aiming towards a map of Tasmania with fossil locations of sea creatures all over it, where you personally found them, correct? That's what we're aiming at?
That's correct. I mean, in a sense, we're trying to be a real museum that has a collection that, we can refer back to and show people. We actually have the Tasmanian, the main Tasmanian Museum is quite interested in some of the records that we've found, including some records that haven't been previously recorded for the state. I think we identified what's called a devil's toenail, a Gryphia species. It's like a sort of oyster, and that's not recorded in Tasmania before. So.
Before the creationists found it. I mentioned that because you see the word museum actually is derived from the old Greek word muse, and muse means to think. So a museum is supposed to be a place where you think. Of course, the opposite of museum is amuse. Amuse, you don't think. You turn on the radio, you are amused, you are not thinking. Be careful with that, you young people. You plug your ears in and you amuse yourself. You stop yourself thinking. Craig's Museum is designed to make people think. It's already helped the guys at the main secular museum to do some thinking about the distribution of the fossils in Tasmania. So keep praying for Craig and the crowd that they will find stuff that hasn't been found before, just like we have at our main museum, place where you can think. So we got school groups starting to come back, and we want them to muse, to actually think with their brains, because that's God's first instruction to all of us.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So thank you so much to everyone who's already in the chat. It's good to see you all here. I'll just run through some of the quick donations we've already had already. Right off the bat, Doki Doki has sent in 10 US buckaroos, a hippo character with a pink hat, flips it backwards and raises its thumb up in the air. There we go. It's a shame we can't see these pictures because I actually, to be honest, I think it's better that we've got the text because I can just narrate them and we can just create our own images in our mind. Another Doki Doki donation, $1.99 US buckaroos, a thumbs up. Well, thank you so much, Doki Doki. It really does mean a lot. And genuinely, your guys' donations does help the wheels go round. It does oil everything and helps us keep on doing research and digs and projects and things like that. So it really does help. So thank you so much. Right. Okay. So moving on to our main sort of aspect of today, it's going to be quite free flowing. We don't have a defined sort of path to go down. I mean, we've got people are bringing different sections in here and there, but it's going to be fairly sort of fluid and conversationalist because Diane, I believe you've come across a very interesting article that was put up by The Guardian. Is that right?
Well, yes, I didn't actually find it. Someone sent us the link to it, so we looked it up. And it has an interesting title. It's Do We Need a New Theory of Evolution?
Goodness me.
Yes. The whole idea that people are questioning the theory of evolution is fairly radical. But in the professional world, sort of, there is a fair bit of dispute, actually, as to how evolution happened. And this article is about that. But we do have to remember, as soon as anyone from the outside critiques the concept that evolution might have happened, they do immediately close ranks. But it's very interesting that The Guardian published this article, which gives a bit of historical background. And every now and again, I think we do need to actually pull back and see what are the things that the evolutionists are saying did actually happen. What are the things that they sort of base their whole theory on, and which ones are real and which ones are theory or only exist in the mind. So we might have a look at that if we go to my slides. Yes, here we go.
There you go.
Yes, all right. So if I just now, right. So this is the headline from the article. Do we need a new theory of evolution? And the subheading there, or the little summary. A new wave of scientists argues that mainstream evolutionary theory needs an urgent overhaul. Now that's interesting in itself. Their opponents dismiss them as misguided careerists. In other words, they're just doing this as a way of advancing their academic career, and the conflict may determine the future of biology. And the article begins with this statement. Strange as it seems, scientists still do not know the answers to some of the most basic questions about how life on Earth evolved. And it goes on to say there are certain core evolutionary principles that no scientist seriously questions. Now that's important because we'll just have a look at a few of those. Because there are scientists who seriously question them, mainly us, but of course we're not considered to be scientists. But as we've just discussed, right, John and Craig and various others, we go out in the field, we actually look for evidence. That's science. But anyway, let's come back to this quote. Everyone agrees that natural selection plays a role, as does mutation and random chance. But how exactly these processes interact and whether other forces might also be at work has become the subject of a bitter dispute. So what they're saying is that in the academic world, It's not all sweetness and light. And I know that from my own personal experience. I did work in the academic world for quite a while as a university lecturer, and it's not all sweetness and light. There's quite a lot of bitter disputes. But if the outside world critiques people, that they do close ranks fairly quickly. So notice he does say that the writer of this article, everyone agrees that natural selection plays a role, as does mutation and random chance. So we need to have a look at these processes. So this is the standard theory of evolution that most people know about and have in their mind without filling in the details. So the whole idea is, right, we started out with chemicals, we ended up with human beings, and this was a long process of increasing complexity. And the processes that actually drove this are natural selection, mutation, and random chance. Now, we need to say, from the point of view of scientific observation, those things, natural selection, mutation, and random chance, are all real. And we agree with the evolutionists that those things exist. What we don't agree with is that they will cause chemicals to turn into people. Now, we need to have a little bit of historical background, and this article does go into a fair bit of historical background. We need to, excuse me, I'm still coughing from the residual effects of having the flu, so please forgive me. Anyway, this article looks at the history of those various ideas, but it doesn't say that we need a new theory of origins. So the article said, do we need a new theory of evolution, right? Not a new theory of origins. And those two things are different. The article assumes that evolution happened and is still happening. So don't anyone write to The Guardian and say, oh, how dare you say that the theory of evolution is wrong? They're not saying that. What they are saying is that there is a dispute about how it actually happens. And people who watch the BBC don't realise that. But the Guardian article does affirm just as much as the BBC does and anybody else that evolution did actually happen, is still happening, but back in the academic world, there's a dispute about how it happened. So we need to go back to what is the sort of wellspring of evolutionary theory. It's not the original origin of evolutionary theory. That goes back into the Greek world, actually, back into the ancient world. But in terms of the modern Western world, everyone puts it down to the theory of evolution became established with this book by Charles Darwin. So we need to have a look at that and look at, everyone thinks it's just called The Origin of Species, but it is worth having a look at the whole full topic, because in 19th century England, they did tend to have these rather long and involved titles for their books. And so on the origin of species, by means of natural selection. So that's where the natural selection that they're talking about in the Guardian article, by means of natural selection or the preservation of favoured races in the struggle for life. Now, straight away there, you've got a problem, because if you look at the two aspects of that title, origin and preservation are not the same thing. So in fact, the whole theory of evolution is really based on a piece of very bad English, right? Because origin and preservation are not the same thing. And that is where the problems have actually arisen. But everyone wanted evolution to happen. So in spite of the fact that this is an obvious piece of bad English, people grasped this whole idea very, very quickly. And we will discuss why that happened in the historical context. And the real problem that we can see, and that honest scientists in the background will admit the term selection, natural selection, what does that mean in terms of a plain English word? Well, the word select just simply means to choose between already existing alternatives. And the Guardian article does actually admit that selection does not actually explain the origin of things. It comes in halfway into the story, as it were. So selection does not make any new kinds. Right. It only allows the already fit kinds to survive. So natural selection is often referred to as survival of the fittest, and we would agree, and the Guardian article agreed, those things are real. Right. In fact, selection can only eliminate some unfit kinds, and we'll talk about some real examples of that later on, particularly some Australian ones. So Darwinian evolution just arbitrarily denied the design and the designer that we see that's obvious in the world around us now. It just assumes that there never was a design or a designer. Both Darwin did that, and this article does that as well. Now, we have a couple of programs which we've done on design. There's lots of evidence for design, so it's worth going back and having a look at that. Ultimately, Darwin's theory does not actually explain the origin of new structures and functions. If you read his book, it talks about lots of variation. It does talk about natural selection. That is a real process, and it's still going on today, and we can see it. So that's not in dispute. But Darwinian evolution just has no explanation for the ultimate origin of things. It just explains what happens to things after they have been after they've come into existence. So it just arbitrarily denies that there is any design and denies that there is a designer. Right. Now, the theory was sorry, you have to excuse me again. Was in trouble for quite a while because Darwin did not really explain where the things that where new features came from, but it sort of got saved when people discovered mutations, when the science of genetics got going. And so that's where those three things that are mentioned in the article, natural selection, mutations, and random processes. Well, mutations and random processes are tied up together. So it's worth having a look at mutations because these are claimed to be what actually keeps evolution going. So mutations are simply changes in genetic information. Again, these are real. We observe them all the time. And in fact, they are considered to be the engine that drives evolution. And so this is from an article about genetics written, well, about 10 years or more than 10 years ago. But anyway, but this is the mindset that most people have. This is mutations sort of saved the day, even though Darwin didn't only explain natural selection. He couldn't explain the origin of new things, but then when people discovered mutations, they thought, yes, that if we put this together. So mutation is the engine that drives evolution and adaptation forward, in that it generates the variation on which natural selection acts. So there we have a possible explanation for natural selection plus mutations giving us the evolutionary process. And the mindset is this, right? Mutations result in good and bad changes to genetic information, and natural selection acts as a sort of weeding out process. It weeds out the bad mutations, leaves the good mutations, and eventually over time, the good mutations build up and produce new living things. Now, that's a nice idea, but out in the real world, there is a problem. There aren't any good mutations. No one's observed any good mutations. And the more we look into mutations and the more we look into how genetics works, the more this is affirmed. And And we can understand that because if you look at the things that cause mutations, they do actually result in random processes. So these are the things that cause mutations: radiation, chemicals. Those are things that come from outside. Now, there are also internal things that happen within our cells. Whenever our cells are reproduce, and that's going on all of the time, the DNA has to be copied, and sometimes you do get copying errors, right? And we do actually have inbuilt repair processes within our cells which are going on all the time, but occasionally these fail, and the end result is mutation. Now, none of those things are particularly good. They are all chance random processes, actually. And what they do is that they degrade in genetic information. So change is very real. Chance random processes are very real, but they're not going to produce evolution. Now, here's an example of where we've actually found this. A few years ago, there was a project called the 1,000 Genomes Project, which was a study of genetic variation using genetic sequences of over 1,000 human genomes, and they took them from a whole lot of different ethnic groups, and it ran over quite a few years. Now, in the end, they analysed more than just 1,000. They got up to 2,504. And a whole raft of papers, of scientific papers, came out from this. Their findings were not particularly edifying in terms of the theory of evolution. And this is from one paper that came out of this. Every newborn's DNA carries more than 60 new mutations. So mutations are very real, right? Some of which lead to birth defects, disease, including cancers. Now, those things are definitely not good. They're very real and they do involve change. But those birth defects, disease, and cancer can hardly be called evolution. They're not going to increase in things in complexity. And in fact, we can say, right, mutations are definitely us, but we're not evolving. So if these things are real, how can we fit them into our worldview? Because what our whole sorry, I'm coughing again. One of the reasons that we exist is to show people that the theory of evolution doesn't work, and there is actually a better theory. So do we need a new theory of evolution? No, we don't. We don't actually need a new theory of evolution. What we need is the original truth about origins. The paper in The Guardian affirms the fact, or affirms the belief, that evolution happened. It's not saying we need to throw out the theory of evolution and come up with something different. They're saying the argument is about how it happened. But in fact, they are missing the point. We don't need a new theory of evolution. What we need is the original truth about origins, right, where things really did come from the Creator. So where do all of those processes fit in? Well, we just need to have a look at the big picture that's given by the Creator. The world started out good, but it didn't stay that way. Sin and judgment came into the world, and we are now living in a world where there is degeneration. Now, that's change, but it's not evolution. So when we look at the real world using the scientific method, we will see design. Darwin just ignored design, and modern evolutionists just ignore design as well. When things started to go downhill, those processes that are ascribed to evolution actually did come into the world. They are real and we should be studying them. Natural selection is real, mutations are real, random chance is real. But all of those things are the result of the world going downhill, not increasing in complexity. Right. The world has definitely changed, but it hasn't evolved. Right. Now, that sounds like it's all bad news. And in a way it is, but there is good news. The world has changed, but God has not. And if we can just come back to us now, thanks, Sam. And
There we go.
yes, okay.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. That's a really good breakdown of the elements in the article and how it relates to everything that we do at Creation Research. And Craig has a visitor. Hello, Craig's visitor. But yes, thank you so much, Diane. And the chat's going mental. Everyone's saying hello to each other. But it's a good thing. Everyone's saying hello to each other, which is good.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Diane, can I just ask a question, because we are going to head into questions first, but unless I missed it, the emphasis in that article is that no matter what explanation we get, it has to be evolution, correct?
It has to be evolution, yes.
Okay.
So what they're saying is the dispute is not the belief that evolution happened. They assume that. The dispute that's going on in the academic world is that how it happened. Now, that is a huge admission, because everyone thinks, oh, yes, we know how evolution happened. We see it whenever we watch any of the BBC natural history programs or any of the other natural history programs. And the article is admitting we don't actually know how it happened. And in the academic world, there is this dispute. But if you dare come in from the outside and say, well, no, we don't need a new theory of evolution, we actually need a theory of origins, they will immediately close ranks. So it's important to understand that.
So are you really saying that Craig's finding of a devil's toenail, the first in Tasmania, and I identified it up here, and he's been in touch with the museum down there, if he was to write a paper on it from a creationist perspective, are you saying it'll be rejected?
Oh, it won't get to first base.
Can I just say something there? It's pretty obvious in this article that the main body of people that hold to the current evolutionary sort of concepts are shutting out those others that are trying to get in with their ideas of evolutionary concepts. They don't want them to have a conference. I think the article talks about the Royal Society in London that was going to have a conference, or did have a conference, but got complaints from 23 of their eminent professors and scientists complaining about the fact that they were discussing these new ideas. And the head of the Royal Society said, well, it doesn't hurt talking about things, does it? Well, if it's creation, it does hurt talking about it, apparently. They won't allow that part of the discussion to come in at all. But it does show you that they're shutting out areas that they don't disagree with, and science is not some sort of process just where people are, having this free discussion and coming up with the best answers. No, there's some great quotes in this article, and Sam, I reckon you should give everyone the link at some point so that they can read it themselves in full.
Okay. Let me make one last comment before we hand over to Sam to pick some questions for us. Now, a good illustration of the point that Diane has made that has been confirmed from our Tasmanian discovery, has been our own personal experience, is a text I got a week and a bit ago from an engineer, a geological engineer type guy, who actually shared with a non-Christian, non-creationist guy the fact that we have made coal, right? The fact that we have made oil, the fact that we have done this visibly in front of everybody, and even burnt the gas that comes off, the methane gas from the clay and stuff. We've actually burnt the coal and identified it as coal by sending it to several professors. And yet when it was shared with this new person who basically had never heard of it before, the response was very simple, and I'll summarize here. Wow, that's basically earth-shaking. If you can make coal in just a few weeks to a few months, then the greenies are not going to be happy because they want to get rid of coal. Secondly, the engineers don't know anything about it, but if they start to think about it, they'll have to change their entire life. He went straight from, making coal in a test tube to changing life and morals, and he said basically people don't want to do that. So the theory of evolution has such a high place in people's thinking for the same reason now as it did in Queen Victoria's day. They want to get rid of Christian morality, strict as it was in Queen Victoria's day, or even loosely applied. They do not want a God who actually is a creator, who therefore has the right. They want chance, who can't tell them to do anything. They want natural selection, which means the options are theirs, and they want mutation because, hey, it's like the lottery every week. We might win sometimes. Okay, Sam, any questions that you want to bring up?
Yes, certainly. I've got a question for you guys before we launch into the chat. So, judging, so the article makes it very clear that they ascertained that evolution definitely 100% happened. It's a question of rethinking, the specifics of how we got to this point, to fill in the gaps, to make it a more coherent and tangible story of life on Earth, according to the secularist view. For someone who is a Christian, and they're a Christian in modern science, and they believe that evolution was how God made, life on Earth. It was a guided process. Would you? I guess the question I'm sort of trying to ask is, would you see that as some form of more of like a cop-out argument?
Okay, let me first of all get in both as a brief answer and then a sneak commercial, and the others can then join in. Okay, I did that debate in England. The BBC hosted it. It was filmed and edited and made available, and it was against England's leading theistic evolutionists, a guy who said God must have used evolution to create. Now, if you want to see the professor absolutely demolished, you will enjoy getting, it's available now on streaming, Sam, correct? So it's called The Big Question Debate, myself versus Professor John Polkinghorne. He's passed on now, so I'm sure he knows what the truth is, because Jesus is the creator, and he does not tolerate any competition from chance random evolution, because that's what you're compromising with if you try to make the God of the Bible, the Christ who is the creator, the Holy Spirit who is the empowering force, actually equal to the theory of evolution. So Diane, you helped me with a lot of preparation for that debate, and there's no doubt about it. It was an outstanding success. We had the whole Liverpool Cathedral absolutely packed. We had police sort of guarding the entryways with traffic and you name it. It was a fabulous night. So streaming, that's available. The Big Question Debate, if you want to see theistic evolution nicely rubbed into the dirt. Diane?
Yes, that's one of the things that people very quickly tried to do when Darwin's theory first came up was, this seems to be the explanation for how for life on Earth. How can we fit that into the Bible? Now they've got everything upside down. They didn't start with Scripture. They started with the theories of a human being, but that had so infiltrated the sort of Western mindset, and the church was so weak that they just capitulated. And so ever since then, they've been trying to fit the theory of evolution into the Bible, but it just does not work, because those two things are opposites. And in fact, they're diametric opposites. And so you do have to make a choice. And so what, sorry, excuse me. And so that's one of the things that we also teach against as part of our work here. And in fact, some of our toughest opposition comes from within the church, which is rather sad to say. But the point is, we can stand our ground and look at what are the things which are scientifically obvious that actually do happen. And natural selection and mutations are those. But you don't need to believe in the theory of evolution to explain those things. They are better explained in terms of the biblical history of the world. And I want to encourage students, don't give up on studying science, and particularly on studying biology, because in fact, when you look at the real world, whether it's living things or fossil things, in fact, they are better explained by a biblical worldview than an evolutionary worldview.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Craig, let me bring you in on this. There's a debate that you and I did down in Tasmania, correct?
Yep.
Australia's 2 leading atheists. Now, we filmed it. The college was packed. We do like doing debates. So if you're out there and you can get a brave enough set of evolutionists, whether it be 1 or 2 or 4, we've had them all. I would encourage you do so. Get their permission to film it. And you can get this one. It's available on streaming. It's called Is Evolutionary Science Reliable? And we simply used as the guideline the current textbook. Everything the textbook says and what the article has stated is absolutely correct. Here's what we used to think. It doesn't work. And it didn't work for the debate. I mean, we trashed them really nicely, of course, but in reality, it's worthwhile. So if you want to get a streaming copy of what Craig and I are saying tonight, plus other things, is evolutionary science reliable? Show it to your friends, show it to your enemies. Craig, any comments from that debate or the stuff that they had to say?
Well, it's getting a few years ago, that one now, John, but I do remember when I was organising the debate that the head of science at the local university I was speaking to basically admitted, he didn't want to go in the debate because he knew that he couldn't win it. And he said, we can never win these debates. So that was an interesting thing. But we actually flew in from the mainland, one of the heads of the Atheist Foundation in Australia, one of the guys that organises the atheist conferences and everything. And they said they were going to go hard at us, but they failed miserably in the end.
Yeah, they certainly did. And we've done lots of debates against leading atheists, and they may as well admit what the professor did. We don't have any evidence and we can't win the debates. Sam, what's the next question?
Okay, before I grab that question, and a plug from me, this is your questions about creation answered. It's a fantastic resource for some burning questions. It even has a whole section on, did God use evolution? So you can pick it up at our store. I will put a link up momentarily, but you can grab it on our store. There we go, creationresearch.net, and you can navigate to whatever part of the world you're in from there, and you can choose your local version to purchase. Right, okay, time for some questions. I've already saved them, so here we go. So this is this is an interesting question. This sort of relates back to what we're talking about. This is from Doki Doki. They say, I see insects. The insects I see trapped in amber look the same of ones today. Is it stasis?
You can actually argue about that because we certainly have insects trapped in amber. First point you need to sort out, is it fake amber available from Indonesia where they make it down behind the antique shop and sell it to the tourists with insects in it? They are very good at that, right? So caution number one. Number two, you will find even the theme for sort of Jurassic Park, the movie, right, deals with insects that can be extracted from the fossil record, from amber, etc. Mosquitoes with blood in them, right? Now that really predates the finding of fossil blood in dinosaurs, but it was actually almost prophetic. We do dig up insects so well preserved, and in amber, they are really well preserved. And yes, I've seen plenty of them. We've got them in our collection, and they are no trouble to recognize at all, any more than these ones, right? Now, I've collected fossils all over the planet. This one here is from the town of Chinchilla. And if you are pretty good at trees, you'll notice this is a tree fern. I mean, we've polished it. Look how beautiful that is. Now, the details are so well preserved because, like the insect that was trapped in amber, it had to happen quickly or it doesn't get preserved. The tree is so well preserved because in real life, these sort of trees are not hard. They're actually quite soft and flaky. So for that to be preserved, it had to be quick. But therefore, it is so well preserved, you can tell exactly what tree it is. Now, I'll come back to more of that later, but you'll find your comment, is it stasis? Well, Stephen Gould, who came up with that sort of theme, was really offering one more new word. Stasis means to stay stable, to stay the same. Right now, he didn't think of that idea, but he made the word popular. Now, as he admitted, the fossils did not show evolution. And he tried to say that there was stasis. The organisms, once they appeared, they'd reached their maximum of survivability, their maximum of stability, their maximum of coping with selection pressure. That was their point of stasis. From then on, they had no reason to change. The trouble is, the first tree ferns in the fossil record look like tree ferns. That's what got to me, and that's why I would have debated Stephen Gould anytime, because he had no evidence against creation and he had no evidence for evolution. What a terrible place to be in. Sam, next question.
Okay, Doc. So this one comes from Shohua, and this is a question I want to know the answer to. He says, I missed the start. Did John give any updates on that burning chunk that was flying through the air? So, John, are there any other updates for that?
Are there any other updates? We're backwards and forwards with a few experts around the planet. Where we are at is simply space junk. But the interesting thing about this space junk is, despite checking all around the planet, we still seem to be the only people who photographed it. It splits into two trails before it hits the top of the film site. And therefore they're smoking, right? When you look at them, they're exhibiting smoke, so we can rule meteorite out. Meteorites don't have enough long chain hydrocarbons to actually burn in our atmosphere. So both of these were giving off carbon rich soot. They were therefore man-made. They'd come from, somewhere unexpected. Normally the military has to trail all of this space junk so they can sort of warn pilots, don't fly here on day 5 of this month, because there'll be a big chunk of a Chinese satellite falling out of the sky. They need to keep track of all of those things, and there's thousands of pieces of them. But this one doesn't seem to have been known by anybody, because nobody apart from us, fortuitously in the right place at the right time, was blessed by God to actually capture this picture. Neither has it been reported anywhere that we can find. If you can find a report not based on our photo, please let us know. But it does mean if you wanted to be conspiratorial, where did this space junk that's probably a satellite come from that had split into two up there in the satellite zone? Was somebody shooting it down? Was it a collision that they didn't expect? And we could come up with a whole host of conspiratorial, and they're popular at the moment in this post-COVID age. But that's as far as we've got. I'm just writing up an article for our printed newsletter, Shogi, so you, being in Australia, should be able to get it. So have a look at our creation news. If you don't currently get it in Australia, it's only available in print in Australia. It used to be all over the world, but it's just too expensive to send that. It will appear as an email form. So if you want to get our newsletter, then sign up, go to our website, creationresearch.net, go to the email form, go to the print form, and let us know what you like. They are both available.
Fantastic. We have a super chat from George Bond, 20 Aussie buckaroos. He says, question, where are the millions to billions of years of fulgurites, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in the preceding layers of the geocolumn?
Okay, anybody else know anything about this one? Or is it back to me? Sounds like it's back to me. Okay, George, you'd better let them know too. I think we're going to be on Standing for Truth next month in August, so it's a good time to tell you where we're going to be. Plus those Aussies who are watching, because I know there are some who've actually visited us and said, saw you on at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. Good on you Aussies for being up early. But I'll actually be at Gympie on the 9th and 10th. We have a Saturday seminar and a Sunday morning at the Church of Christ in Gympie. That'll be a great time if you're up there. And a month or so later, a special trip to Jurassic Ark, our outdoor museum, which isn't far from there. Fulgurites, for those of you who don't know what they are reportedly lightning strikes in sand. They fuse. You end up with a shattery sort of tube of glass where the sand, first of all, melts, turns into glass, and may be shaped around a root, may not be shaped around a root. Normally, the ones that are root-based are not glass, they are calcite, and you get the shape of the root. So let's restrict our ones to actually the glassy ones, because what seems to happen there is you get a lightning strike, and where it hits the sand, it gets glass all the way down to when the energy is dissipated. Now, a few problems with the explanation, because some of you who follow up lightning strikes know very well that the lightning actually starts from the ground and goes up, right? It doesn't do the opposite. So we're at a bit of a loss sometimes with these, But at the present time, the lightning strike explanation, heat-wise, glass-wise, works best. And in terms of your question, it's a good question because you don't find them in the Cambrian. Unless the Cambrian is exposed at the surface and has broken down to form a sand, and this does happen, right? I'm here, my property is sitting on sort of Ordovician Silurian rock, but up at the corner, there's a Triassic rock up there, and there's no fulgurites anywhere near here, but further down the road, all of the local Ordovician has decomposed, all of the Silurian has decomposed into sand. Now, that's where I want to go looking for fulgurites, because that's what they would be, but it's actually a recent decomposition, not a present-day one. But it's true, fulgurites, meteorites are not found in the pre-flood portions of the geologic column at all, to the best of my knowledge. Anybody else on that one? What it does, therefore, is simply eliminate the concept of vast periods of time in the geologic column, because it attacks uniformitarianism. Something was different about the time when the majority of these rock layers were laid down.
There we go. Fantastic. Right, we can do one more question, or we can move on to your side, John.
Okay, you can move on to my side because it fits very well with what we've been doing. Diane, you will recognize one of these books off our shelf because we actually found it in a secondhand bookshop one day, and it is Charles Darwin, you know, Origin of Species. It's actually got the full title because this is a very old book, and then it's got the second book of his, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. Now, obviously, it wasn't true. Don't talk sex, we're British. It didn't happen with Darwin and the others. But the first one's got the full pages in it. Now, I read that. It was sort of almost compulsory reading for university biology, geology, etc. And so I'm very familiar with Charles Darwin's claims. Now, he knew about fossils, right? He knew about some of the beautiful petrified wood like we've got in our collection. He also knew that this one here is actually a slice of a maple tree, just like I told you that this is a slice of a tree fern. Now, that's why Charles Darwin actually in his life studies, in his claims about evolution, really says the fossils are the weakest part of his theory. Read it in his book. In the chapter on geology, he says that himself. And of course, he goes on to make predictions about in the future, they'll fill in the missing gaps. They'll fill in the missing links. They'll make the whole geological history valid by finding these fossils that don't connect tree ferns to anything, finding the fossils that don't connect the tree ferns to seaweed or maple trees or anything like that. Now, what else he knew was this, that when you come with me to Solnhofen in Germany, yes, we have spent a lot of supporters' money going to these places, so we actually have the evidence ourselves. Do you see this lovely fossil I brought back? Now, there were several of us on that dig that day. I was the only Aussie. The rest were Europeans. There was even one Englishman there, which by definition in those days was also European because of the common market. I believe that's all falling apart now. But then you have a look at this fossil here. Now, I knew what that was, so I took the slab, I brought it home, and I went down the back and I got one. Now, do you see this fossil and that are exactly the same? Now, this is a cycad leaf. It lives here in Australia. That's a cycad plant. It used to obviously live somewhere near southern Germany, and it was picked up, washed, and buried in this lovely silty, flaky material where you can get the fossils as easily. Now, Charles Darwin knew about that. In fact, he invented the name of those creatures, living fossils. The cycad is still living. The tree fern is still living. The maple tree is still living. Doesn't matter if you say, well, this was only buried 15 million years ago, and this is Jurassic, 110 million years ago, and the same is true for the German rocks. It doesn't matter how old you make it. What's interesting is the first time a fossil appears, Charles Darwin could recognize it. If it was still here today, he called it a living fossil. And by far the majority of fossils we dig up, particularly in the plant world, are either living fossils, they're easy to recognize, or you won't recognize what they are because they've died out and you have no living equivalent. Now, by the time I'd finished university, there's one of our textbooks, Professor Carter from Cambridge University. No, not Cambridge in the USA. I mean the real one, you know, where they've had a school beside a little bridge that went over a little river, and it's still there 1100 years later. Rather prestigious place, world famous. Okay, so Professor Carter writes a book, Structure and Habitat, Invertebrate Evolution. Now, I don't know about you, but my means of studying just huge quantities of information, I'm truly grateful to God I've got a good memory, because I would read through the book, underline stuff. You can see it. There it is, my old student underlining. And then I would go and process it and store the key points in my brain. So if you want to run a test, you can go and have a look at Professor Carter's book, because every chapter he finishes. And after a while, you see, I hadn't made up my mind about evolution or creation in those days. I was still struggling. Why? Because even the Christian professors said, just say God used evolution. And I'd read Genesis, and it didn't seem like God said, I took dust and I turned it into a living cell. Only took me 300 million days. They didn't say anything like that. He said, in the evening and morning were the first day. And I commanded the earth to bring forth plants. And the evening and morning were the third day before the sun. It seems like Genesis was totally different than anything either Professor John Polkinghorne thought, or what my professor, who claimed to be a Christian and the head of the theology department, said as well. Because at the end of the first chapter, second chapter, third chapter, the summaries began to look almost identical. Once the creatures appear, they seem to be inherently stable. Read the chapters yourself. Go and have a look at every summary. In fact, what you'll find is by the time you get to the end of the book, he has a whole series of points where he's added up the end of the chapters. And you can see why the people who wrote the article that's reported here, originally, I believe, a little bit out of Nature, and then put together by The Guardian very bravely, except almost cowardly, where they say, we need a new theory of evolution. Great. I think people like me and Diane and Craig have been saying that for quite a while. Have a look at it on the debate. But then they went to say, we know evolution is true. Natural selection, mutation, etc. Are the framework, but something's not working. Now, we've been saying that for ages too. And so is this guy. I mean, think carefully. Professor Stephen Gould is famous for his theory of stasis. Now, he didn't invent it, because this guy says, once the creatures appear, they seem to be inherently stable. He had stasis long before Professor Gould. He just wasn't as controversial or as famous. But stop. If we've known it since Darwin's day, and if we've known it since I was at Queensland University 4 or 5 years, if we've known it since Stephen Gould said it, what the heck are these guys going on about? We don't need a new explanation of evolution. We need to scrap it totally. From Darwin's day right up to the present, we have not found those missing links. We have observed natural selection. Craig's going to talk a bit more about that. We have observed mutation. I deliberately went and did 3 years of genetics, and I loved the stuff. In fact, I really enjoyed it and memorized it up in my head as well. We have not found a mechanism that makes things evolve from simple to complex or in any other way, shape or form. Our book by Professor Carter, our comments by Stephen Gould do not support we need a new theory of evolution. They support we need to scrap evolution. Our debates with Professor Polkinghorne or against the leading atheists here do not advise we need a new way of thinking about this. We need to scrap it totally and go back to saying, hey, it really works. If you believe God created the first plants, if you believe God created plants to produce their own kind, then one prediction is that cycads have always been cycads. Now, at that point, quite a few years after I left university, that's when I threw evolution out. Not at university. I guess you say you want your degree, you want your master's, you want your PhD, you fit the system. Or you find a very good way of using the third person English to say, my professor says. That, by the way, is good advice. It avoids trouble, but it enables you to tell the truth at the same time. Or having done genetics, Let me tell you something about food. Do you know what that is? No, it's not a green pear, although that's what most people thought it was. It is a pear-shaped fruit. And when I was in Australia growing up, just after World War II, we got a lot of these. You see, there wasn't much money around then, just like finance is really tight at the end of COVID. We called these things chocos, and they had smooth sometimes, but mostly prickly surfaces. And so we peeled the skin, and your mum fed you this mashed up. She fed you it in pies. I mean, it was almost tasteless. Since then, by the way, we have practiced natural selection. See, I can rub my hands all over. Oh, that's lovely and cool. No prickles anymore. We've managed to eliminate the prickles. Well, actually, we didn't. We went looking for the South American versions that were actually mutant versions with no prickles. Somehow or other, they'd lost their prickles. Then we take the big seed that's inside and we actually plant it, and you grow prickleless chocos. Of course, I was doing research in South America one year, and look what I came across. Well, I wasn't the first to find it, but this is a mutant one of those. Do you notice one thing? I've never found a white one that exceeds the green ones in size. The green fruit has chlorophyll even in the skin. The white ones, well, they are mushy. They're a nicer color, I guess. They're not sort of sick green like spew. That's what this one looks like. No wonder Mum mixed it with apple and anything else she could find. The white one has lost its color, lost its chlorophyll, lost any possibility of much taste. Or for those of you who are cooking people, just listen to a bit of cooking. You can get to enjoy these. I'll tell you how. Cut them into thin slices, leave the skin on. That's the smooth ones, that is. And fry them in olive oil that's been infused with garlic. Just thin slices, and you'll be amazed how nice they taste. Or better still, get the seed out, because I love to let these sit. The seed will start poking out as the seed grows on the nutrition in the plant, and then roast the seeds. There are many ways of eating the fruit that God has made. And it is good to eat, by the way, and it's good to look at, and it even tastes good. These ones, I find it much harder to cook these. A lot more garlic, a lot more flavor. You may as well eat the oil you've cooked in. And oh, by the way, you can actually turn them all into fruit pies. But you see, the point is, all of these have been mutated and then naturally selected. Natural selection is real. Mutation is real, but so far it has not turned this into an apple or any sort. Mutation even works in these. In the 1800s, somebody found a mutant orange tree in Brazil. It did. How it got there, nobody knows. But it definitely sprouted a branch on which were growing oranges. But can you see the navel at the bottom? That's where they get their name from. And it had no seeds. Now, this was taken to America, North America, and in 1873, it produced a crop. Oh, how do you do that, by the way? Get your splicing tools out. Get the branch that has somehow or other mutated between the trunk and the edge. Mutation is real, and you can be the natural selector. Hey, I'm natural selector, capital N, capital S. Take the branch off, put it in some rooting material, and then it will grow its own roots, and then you'll end up making a cutting. Or if you don't like doing it that way, you can actually cut a bit off and then get a wild orange tree and put a little V shape in. Take a V shape on the end of the branch, put it in there and bind it up really tight, keep the air out, keep the bugs out, and for the rest of its life, that tree will have seedless oranges. No good for the orange. You can't go and buy a packet of navel orange seeds. They don't have them. So you are doomed from then on to actually grow them only by grafting. Mutation. In one generation, this would have died out, except somebody saw it. Somebody unnaturally selected it. Now, at that point in time, it's probably good to remind you of this one here. We did a series on Darwin. This one here is Darwin's Evolution, a very unnatural selection. So you ask, why do we have so many cows? Because we became the selector. Why did we end up with sheep with short legs? It was cheaper to build fences that only had 1 or 2 rows of stones. So we looked for sheep that were mutant things. They couldn't run away from foxes. They couldn't jump out of a hole. They were useless, except if you wanted to lock them in with a short fence. So number 1, mutation is real. Number 2, most selection is actually unnatural. It's artificial. And natural selection is also very real. And I'll leave Craig to talk about that in a moment. And you see, we have practiced selection with this. Oh, you say, what is it? Well, come on. You all know about bananas, don't you? Now, when you bite them through, you discover one thing. They're nice. Really are. Good food. Why? They don't have seeds. Useless. I mean, you can't plant a banana. You have to plant the original way that you could have had because the seeds have disintegrated. Oh, you keep going. Occasionally, you'll find little black seeds in there, but they are not viable. They do not generate. So the banana used to have 2 ways of growing, one from seeds and one from the corm at the bottom. We've eliminated the seeds by selecting the bigger ones, the tastier ones, and it turns out the price you pay, the more taste you want, the less seeds you have. So you have a balance there. But natural selection is very real. Mutation is very real, and the authors are right. It does not provide any evidence for evolution at all. I guess there's one other thing I'm going to bring up here, and they didn't talk about it. You need to. Do you need to see our DVD, Monkeys Don't Cry? We did that with David Reeves in America. Recommend you have a look at some of his ministry programs. They're great. So it's filmed 3 parts over there. Monkeys Don't Cry, because the whole theory of evolution assumes the creatures are so similar to each other. You can arrange a fossil tree from one end to the other. You can arrange the genetics from one end to the other. But if I get my friends here, remember we've showed you before Cro-Magnon skull, we've showed you before Neanderthal skull, and we've showed you before, yes, we do spend a fair bit of money on human skulls, not the real ones. These are the casts, accurate ones, accurate inside. If you want to buy a human skull cast, they're not all expensive. But if you want to get one that you can measure the brain space inside, be prepared to pay quite a fortune. So thank you to those of you who donate. But the interesting thing is when you study the live versions, or the dead versions tell you what's wrong with evolution. One is Cro-Magnon had a much bigger brain, up to 1,800 cubic centimeters. Even Neanderthal had up to 1,1500. He had bigger brain space than us, and we 1,200 to 1,400 maximum. No gorilla comes anywhere near it. So the real history of skulls shows brain size has diminished. That's why Noah could build an ark, and you can't even build a tin canoe and make it work. There's been a degeneration, the history says. And here's another thing that's different. Monkeys don't cry. You see, you and I are the only creatures on the planet that will actually feel sad and weep. You remember the shortest verse in the Bible? Jesus wept. Number 1, proving he wasn't a monkey. You see, monkeys don't weep. Oh, they'll moan, they'll groan, they'll complain, they'll be sad. They can be sad, but they will not have those nice little tear glands that you find so beneficial in moistening your eyes as well as expressing sorrow. And it's become the epitome of human sorrow. A tear was shed for poor Billy, right? So if you want to see that evidence, go and have a look at Monkeys Don't Cry. You'll find it funny, humorous, and very informative as to the real differences between monkeys and men, and why the authors of that article said we've got to keep evolution. No other option is available. So that if Craig does submit his fossil devil's toenail, that Greffia oyster, I'm sorry if they know he's a creationist, he's probably going to get kicked in the teeth, pooped out, and everyone warned about how dangerous this man is. That's probably enough for me for the moment. So if anybody's got any questions at the moment, both from Diane and Craig and Sam, have a go at me, and then we'll throw it open to the audience again.
Excellent stuff. I will say that Rehoboth Baptist raised a very funny point earlier when you pulled out the banana. Anyone else get flashbacks of Ray Comfort when John pulled out the banana? And I'm not going to lie, I did get flashbacks there as well. So I thought that was worth a good chuckle. Right. Okay. So let's look at some questions here. This one comes in from Ravi. He says, you provide some, this is back when Diane was doing her presentation. You provide some interesting issues with evolution, but why does God not show himself or provide more clear evidence of his existence? I wonder about this a lot.
I'm happy to say something there to start the response off. Ravi, God has revealed himself, but if he just appeared in front of everybody so that there was no question, then there's no free choice, no free will, and God wants us to choose to follow him. So in the beginning, Adam and Eve chose to disobey God, but God gave them the will, or the ability, gave them will to choose. And so he gives us the ability to choose as well. He gives us the ability to have a free will, and he's done that via faith. He's got to give us enough information so that we can have faith, and I believe that he's done that, one, in creation, which is why we're involved in this ministry, but also in his holy word, the Bible. So there's some incredible things in the Bible, because God sees the beginning from the end, or the end from the beginning, and he has revealed that to us carefully, so that if you investigate the scriptures, you can see that God has to be involved. Otherwise, how do you explain that Jesus Christ was described in detail hundreds and thousands of years before he actually turned up on this planet? So if you go and read, for example, Psalm 22, and it talks about they pierced my hands and my feet, at a time when stoning was the main method of execution in the time of King David. And yet it's talking about piercing hands and feet, a type of capital punishment that the Romans brought in through crucifixion, and it's talking about Jesus. Go and read Psalm 22. Go and read Isaiah 53. Go and read many other prophecies of Jesus given in advance in the Bible, and you will see that that only God could do this. I mean, the Bible has been written by over 40 different authors over 1,500 years in 3 languages on 3 continents, and yet it has this one enduring theme, God's desire to connect with mankind through the person of Jesus Christ. And so if you can see that in the totality of the scriptures, that's evidence in itself, and it's enough evidence for you to be able to make that choice. The Bible says if you earnestly seek him, you will find him. So keep reading his word, and you will indeed find him. And creation is a great starting point, because you can just see the design. You can see that it works as per the Bible. But at the end of the day, you have to read his word in totality and seek him and give your life to him in faith. You can't know everything all at once, but you need to step out in faith and give your life to him and take that choice. So we're all praying that you will do that one day, Ravi.
Okay, at my end, thanks, Craig. Great stuff there. At my end, you'll find that I did not grow up in a church family. I've said that plenty of times. I found an old Bible. I read it after being provoked by the theory of evolution. I wasn't setting out to look for God. I stumbled across him, as you might say, like Paul did on the road to Emmaus. So when you have a look at that, the Bible then says, as Craig quoted, if you search for me with all your heart, you will find me. Right now, I then married a young lady whose father was the president of the Bible Society, who loved to share the story of people who'd done exactly that. The chief one that I remember most was a Muslim prince. He had all the money you could buy, had all the access to harems, and you name it, none of which satisfied him. Right, so he decided he would set out to travel the world, could afford to do it. You and I can't afford to do many of these things, so those choices are not available to many of us. But he set out and he began wandering all the world, and his testimony is that on what the Christians call Christmas, he was wandering past a shop, which turned out to be the Bible Society store, And in the door was a sign that said, "Unto you this day is born a Saviour." Muhammad is not a saviour. The law that you get under Muhammad does not free you, it binds you. What he needed to do was find a saviour, and at that point his choice was walk inside, ask for a book, find out who this saviour is. Now that's the choice you're going to be faced with. You can't choose everything on this planet. I didn't even choose to be born. I didn't choose to be a science student or anything like that. Some of the choices are way beyond us, but in reality he did choose to go into that room and ask, and the end result, if you search for me with all your heart, he'd spent a fortune traveling. You might only have $10, but he spent a fortune traveling, and God was there waiting for him, just like he promised. If you seek for me with all your heart, you will find me. So I can give you no better advice than that, but I'll give you a warning. In Romans chapter 1, the Apostle Paul, who was on his way to kill Christians and was met by Jesus Christ, then tutored for 3 years out in the desert, that's the testimony of the Bible, comes back, writes things like the books of Romans, where he says God has stamped his nature on creation. There's evidence number one. Number two, it says this is so clear you can see it. That's number two. Number three, and you can understand it. Number four, therefore you are without excuse. So can I encourage you, stop using excuses? You know the world didn't happen by accident, didn't happen by chance. The people who wrote this article, they know that chance and natural selection mutations don't explain it at all. They need to make another choice. They're not making it. The only choice they're making it is, hey, we've got to find another theory. Well, it's a choice, but it's a bad one. You can actually see around you the evidence and warning. The scripture goes on to say, therefore you have no excuse, right? I always have to tell the downside as well as the positive side. Be like that Muslim prince. Go into the shop, ask for information about this Saviour, and then act on it. You will be held accountable for the limited choices you actually have. But that's the most magnificent choice God offers you.
Yes, and there's a scripture that aptly applies to this. It's from John 20. It's the account of Jesus and Thomas. I'll just read it out for you. Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood amongst them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed." I think this is a very poignant scripture, because Bravi, you remind me of Thomas, and Thomas's nickname is Doubting Thomas. He was always doubting, and he wanted to physically see and touch, and we don't have that luxury in terms of seeing, Jesus in the flesh nowadays. But that's where the faith aspect comes in. Because Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed." So I think that's something to take away from this as well, is that, we are, we're all in the same boat. We're not, no one's special here. We're all very much on the journey together. And, we have the same evidence in front of us. Every single person has the same evidence in front of us, but we come to different conclusions. So that's really important to understand as well. Anything from you?
I was just going to say, Sam, with that we have witnesses. So I've never been to the Amazon, but I believe it's there because I believe the witnesses that have been there have written about it, have shown it, etc. And so we have witnesses in the scriptures. And if you read those accounts and see that they're believable and they fit in, for example, with prophecies from past times, it just makes the whole thing so real. and able to be believed. Just like I believe that the Amazon is real, but I've never been there.
Yes, just going back to the Romans 1 passage where it says God has stamped his nature on the creation, so much so that people are without excuse. The more we look into the created world or into the physical world, and we do see more and more evidence of design. And one of the modern applications of that is the whole burgeoning science of what's called biomimetics, where people are studying living things and then trying to build things based on those living things. Now, in order to do that, they have to apply their minds. So what they are admitting by doing that is that there is very clear evidence of design. Now, design is the product of a mind. As this article we've been talking about and evolutionary theory in general says that, it's all chance random processes. But the more we look into the living world particularly, the more evidence we see of plan and purpose and design. We see evidence of a mind at work. Now, that alone is not going to lead you to the real God who offers you salvation. That's where you do need the scriptures. That's where you do need the evidence of the witnesses who were there. And Craig's point is very important, that when Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen but believe," what happened is that the people who were there at the time of Jesus' life, his death and resurrection and ascension, they saw that. They wrote it down for us so that we can believe. But they saw that actually happen in the real world. So we do see evidence in the world around us today. It is there that there is design, there is a designer, but we also need to go to the scriptures as well. So it's both our observations of the world today and the observations of the people who were there in Jesus' time and in the past, who wrote things down for us that we might know that this is the God of the real world. So there is evidence there. It's just a matter of are you prepared to accept it and act upon it?
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Right. We've had some super stickers as well. So I'll put those on the screen from Iron Matt for US Buckaroos. Pair character exaggerately stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. Doki has sent in 149 US Buckaroos, a slice of cherry pie. Doki again sent in 3 US Buckaroos. Hippo character in tactical gear does tactical flanking maneuver hand gestures. I have no idea what that could possibly be. But we've got a super chat as well from George Bond for 10 Aussie Buckaroos. Did you know Noah was a conspiratorial? My brain is not working today. Was a conspiracies, but then the rain came. I think I know what you mean, George. The subject of conspiracies, and then the rain came. We've had some more as well from Doki again. Goodness me, Doki is dropping the big bucks today. Super 5 US Buckaroos, a Shiva dog in combat position. Neil Grindley, super chat for 10 British Buckaroos. Thank you so much. Keith as well, 10 US Buckaroos. God bless your ministry. No, God bless you, Keith. Thank you so much for sending that. It really does help. Again, Doki, goodness me, 149 US Buckaroos. Banana, I think that's in reference to your... There you go. There we go. So that's the super chat and super stickers. Let me just...
Actually, Sam, the reason I had the banana ready is to make a point about the whole issue of the philosophy behind this article that really happened to me. I'm in New Zealand. I get a request from New Zealand national TV. Can I be interviewed? Right. So I agreed to that. And they said, we'll meet you at the zoo. I said, okay, fine. What's the interview about? Oh, the difference between men and monkeys and all the things. Right. And I said, okay, you can interview me there. And they all turn up. He's a national broadcaster over there. And they get permission. I've got to be there before the crowds turn up in the morning. You know, there's no interference with crowds or anything. I'm standing in front of the monkey cage, right? And early in the morning, the monkeys are all sort of quiet. They've had their feed, etc. And I'm standing in front looking like the creation guy, John Mackay. My clothes haven't changed in 40 years, just about. But in reality, they then start a question, right? So the question is quite a political question. And as soon as I open my mouth, one of their guys goes right up the side of the cage out of view, banging all the bars in the cage. And of course, you see my mouth open, then you hear, and that's what they played. That's what creationists think. Monkey talk, rubbish. I thought, you dirty rotters. They didn't want to know the truth at all. They wanted to poke fun. And the sad thing is the evidence of this article is good points for acknowledging evolution doesn't work in its current form. No points for not acknowledging we need to get rid of it totally, because that's what the evidence fits. Did you notice the verse that both Craig and Diane quoted? God has stamped his nature on the creation, and you can all see it. That's evidence. You can understand it. That's intellect, and you have no excuse for denying it. That's you and I and how God sees us. Don't go by man's science opinion. So we've got to have a scientific evidence. No, we have to have the truth. We are interested in what's right and not what's just theory. So don't go for science. Go for truth versus error, not science versus religion. Okay, I think it's time for Craig. We're sort of 7:30 at the moment here.
I know the questions are flowing in like I'm overwhelmed with questions. Right. Okay, Craig. It's over to you, my friend.
Okay. Well, yeah, just following on from what John was saying, about living fossils, I guess. I'm going to start there. You've got some slides of mine there, Sam, that you might as well put up now. So this is one of our displays at the museum. This whole thing of mutations that Diane was talking about, if mutations are constant and regular, as they say they are, then things over millions of years ought to change, because that's the driving force of natural selection and evolution, is these mutations. Yet just go back that one, please, Sam.
Hey, Craig, I recognise those fossils, Craig. I think they're micro, aren't they?
Yeah, they're yours, John. Yeah, they're online. But the real specimens are mine. So we're working well together there. So on the left, you've got a nautilus. On the far left is the nautilus fossil, which is supposedly up to 450 million years old. This is a time frame that is hard for us to even fathom. And if mutations are constantly happening, then why hasn't this thing changed compared to the modern one? There ought to be some sort of change. And if millions of years or 450 million years are involved, then surely there would be more change than what we're seeing there. Same with the pipefish that you can see. At the top, there's a real pipefish from the modern sort of, it was living when we had it there at Seahorse World, which we run. And there's the fossil below it that John gave, and that's, at least 20 million years old. Again, it hasn't changed at all. So this theme is seen over and over and over again in the fossil record and with things that are living today. There's just no change, or very, very little change. But change does happen, and we accept that. But just next slide, Sam, we'll show a couple more examples of this before we get on to some of the examples in Tasmania. So there's a scallop that's in Permian rock, so that's at least 200 million years old. It hasn't changed. And the next slide, just one more example there. I've found a few shell fossils in shops and so on, and we happen to have shells. So you try and pick which one's the fossil, try and pick which one's the real one. It's quite a challenge, because there just is very, very limited change in them. It's not saying that change doesn't happen to some degree, but really over 10, 20, 450 million years, if mutations are driving change in evolution, then something ought to have changed a lot more than it shows in the fossil record. So, just come off that now, Sam. So in the Tasmanian context, when it comes to natural selection that we've been talking about, we've got the Tasmanian devil. Okay, now it only is found in Tasmania, the island off the southern part of Australia there, for some of you in other countries that might not know it so well. But it is known to have occurred on mainland Australia. So why is it only in Tasmania now? Well, it seems that it's an animal that can't handle the competition from other carnivores. So when the Aboriginals have brought in, for example, dingoes, which are wild dogs that are found throughout mainland Australia, they've outcompeted other marsupial carnivores like the Tasmanian devil, or in fact the thylacine, what's called the Tasmanian tiger now. And they've died out on the mainland, but they're still in Tasmania because the Aboriginals that came to Tasmania didn't seem to bring dingoes. So there's no dingoes in Tasmania. In fact, there's no carnivores of any sort other than the thylacine, which is now extinct, and the Tasmanian devil. So that the Tasmanian devil, which is only a small animal, really, it's not much bigger than the standard cat, a little bit fatter, but not much bigger than in height than the standard domestic cat, is basically the chief carnivore in Tasmania. And it has survived, but it's struggling now. So a disease has come in, and it's called the facial tumour disease, and it's destroying the Tasmanian devil population at the moment in Tasmania. And so clever minds are out there trying to find answers to this disease, but so far unsuccessfully. There are pockets of the devil still in parts of Tasmania that are going okay at the moment. But if evolution is really something that works, and survival of, well, I suppose it's survival of the fittest, but if natural selection is happening and mutations can continuously occur and allow the devil to evolve beyond this disease, then we ought to be seeing it happening. But it's not. It's driving it towards extinction. And this is really the story of natural selection ultimately. If you're given it enough time, through constant mutations, things will ultimately become extinct. It doesn't lead to upward and ever improving evolution. But we do have an example of also in Tasmania of where natural selection can drive diversity in some of our eucalypts. So across Australia, there's over 600 species of eucalypts. But from a creationist perspective, we would say basically these have come from the one created kind, so that they've diversified and we've got different species. And you can still see this in action to some degree at the moment. So in Tasmania, we've got 3 white gum species. We call them species, not to say they're individual created kinds. I think they've come from the one created kind. There's Eucalyptus dalrympleana, which occurs at higher elevations on the mountains here in Tassie. You've got a very similar white gum called Eucalyptus rubida that occurs sort of in the colder zones below the dalrympleana, and then you've got the lowland white gum called Eucalyptus viminalis. So they're all very similar, very simple to look at, but their juvenile seedlings are quite different, and some of them have a lot wider leaves, for example, a lot more what's called a glaucous or waxy covering on them, and the waxy covering helps them to survive the heavy frosts and cold on the highlands, whereas the lowland species doesn't have this. So you can see that there's a sort of selection that's driving a limited amount of change within this kind, if you like, but it's not creating a new kind, something that's not a white gum, if you like. So I actually found a tree in the highlands that was a connection between the two of the white gums, the dalrympleana and the rubida, and I reported it to the local university, and they were very interested to come up and have a look at it. There was only a couple of trees in a particular area in the mountains that had these combined features between the two, and it's basically showing this spectrum, I guess, across the different species. So it's still happening basically before our eyes right at the moment. There's other eucalypts that are the same. We've got Eucalyptus obliqua, which is called brown top stringy bark down here. It grows over 90 meters, so that's 270 feet for you Americans, and that is the second tallest known flowering plant in the world. It occurs down here. Very, very big trees, several meters across in diameter at the base of the trees. Just enormous things to look at. But the very same species you can go to on the west coast of Tasmania, that's getting hit by the constant winds in the poor sandy soils on the west coast. And it's a tree that's only, sort of 15 to 20 metres high or lower, which is, less than 60 feet, which is showing you how the environment can drive a lot of these changes. They certainly can. As long as it's got good free draining soils, the tree will survive there. But other factors like desiccation, poor nutrition in the soils and so on will affect how tall it can grow. So these things within the genetic diversity within a species, they can handle a range of environmental conditions, but it won't create a new kind. It won't create a new type of plant. It's just that one kind adapting within its capacities to the environment that it's in. And this is one of the things that I guess this paper that started our whole show off today won't take into consideration. So the evolutionists are trying to bring in new ideas for evolution, but they won't bring in ideas such as, well, is there limits to what natural selection can do? Are there limits to what a created kind can evolve into? Or I don't suppose that they think it's a created kind, but is there a limit as to what sort of species something can evolve into? And of course, from a creationist perspective, we believe there are limits. God has put limits. He said things will reproduce after their kind. And so that's the limits. That's something we should be looking at. What are the limits within genetic diversity that things can evolve into? So I guess that's, the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine, is now extinct. That's another example of something that couldn't evolve to pressures that were put upon it that it wasn't used to. And there's many examples of that. I'm not sure if there's a couple of things I'd like to bring up regarding the paper that Diane started off with. Just basically showing that these evolutionary scientists are basically acknowledging that evolution doesn't work. There was one from Armin Moshek, I think is how you pronounce his name, a biologist from Indiana University, who says the first eye, the first wing, the first placenta, how they emerge. Explaining these is the foundational motivation of evolutionary biology, and yet we still do not have a good answer. This classic idea of gradual change, one happy accident at a time, has so far fallen flat. So it's not working. They can see that it's not working, but they won't cast their eye to design or a creator. And I think one of the reasons that they can't do this is if you spend your entire life as a university professor teaching that evolution is indeed a fact and that it happens and you've taught thousands of students over the years, how are you ever going to come back from that and acknowledge that it doesn't work when you've spent your entire life teaching it? And this is actually brought out by the article's writer, who was Stephen Barany, who's apparently from the Imperial College in London, and he's a science writer. he's been quite honest to a certain degree in this article, which is quite refreshing. But he says that it's a struggle for professional recognition and status about who gets to decide what is core and what is peripheral to the discipline. And he goes on to say that underneath all of this lurks another deeper question, whether the idea of a grand story of biology is a fairy tale we need to finally give up. That they're big words, okay? Is it a fairy tale we need to finally give up? And the trouble is, they won't look at design. They won't look at the possibility of a designer. So if your science is built around naturalistic, materialistic assumptions, and you won't allow God a foothold in the door, then you're never going to find God because you've ruled him out to start with. So these guys have got to get to the stage where they at least acknowledge the possibility that there is a designer, that the different kinds out there have limits as to how far they can change, how far they can be modified with their mutational sort of issues going on there, but they won't. Sadly, they won't. Another guy, Gunther Wagner, I've got another quote here from Yale University. He's a biologist there. He says, if we cannot explain things with the tools we have right now, we must find new ways of explaining. So they're sort of partway there, but they've just got to open the door to creation as being an option in the first place. And then they might start finding the real solutions.
Craig, I'll just add one comment to you, if you don't mind, as an illustration of what you just said. If a professor does reach the conclusion that we need a new explanation and does say evolution is totally bankrupt and therefore moves on to creation, warning, he must expect to pay a big price. Reason we know that? We have quite a few of them who we've interviewed, including this guy, Professor Ed Nealon, who works at a university, but wisely got his tenure. You're accepted as the professor or whatever, and basically they almost have to accuse you of committing murder or treason before they can get rid of you. But Ed, on this, which is really dealing with the design of life, not only deals with the fact that evolution can't explain it, he goes on to say, here's why it can't explain it. If you're going to have hydrogen and evolve all by itself through chance and natural selection, then how is this going to happen if all you've got is hydrogen? Because your first question is, where did the hydrogen come from? And the evolutionary theory falls apart right there, because you then got to go and say, where did the space that the hydrogen's in, where did that come from? Where did the rules come from that hydrogen plus oxygen gives water? Where did the rules come from that hydrogen has low gravitational attraction? Where did electrons come from? He said, you're out of the ballpark even before the ballpark's been invented. So in his Design of Life, which I'd encourage you, is available stream, Professor Ed Nealon, but basically he's had every attack under the sun thrust upon him by authorities, by academics, by you name it. So warning, what Craig said is real. Diana and I have affected by it. Many of our colleagues have been affected by it. You take a stand that says creation is true, and you will have to be publicly ridiculed and be prepared for it and get your answers ready aforetime, or put yourself in a position to be well engineered as in a right place to actually stage a fight. Can I encourage you, stand for the truth, find out what it is, be certain of it, and tell people. In the beginning, God created. That's why you can't explain the space being there all by itself. It has to come from somewhere. You need to know what Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 says, and you don't need to be a theologian to figure that out. A little kid can read Genesis and tell you what it says. It's the adults who are brainwashed with evolution who struggle. Is a day really a day? Did the light come before the plants were there? Otherwise, how did they survive, etc.? So you must be equipped, both scientifically as well as biblically, to recognize nonsense when it's nonsense and truth when it's truth. That's why Paul wrote to Timothy and he said, watch out for false science. Tim was not your average physicist. He wasn't a geologist. Geology wasn't even invented, but he could tell the difference between truth and error, between true science and false science, even though he was trained in theology only, brought up by Paul, given his Bible studies, out there with the armor of God on and the knowledge of God's word in his heart, in his mind and soul, and he shared it. Watch out for false science, you Christians out there. You need to warn the pastors about it. Stop them compromising with theistic evolution because it destroys everything. Thanks, Craig.
Yeah, well, I was also just going to add, we had a visitor to our museum just recently who was a scientist and graduate from science at least, and was criticising us for our displays in that, you know, when we're even quoting it, evolutionary scientists that are highlighting problems with evolution, saying that we've got confirmation bias, that we're biasing our displays towards the things that confirm our existing bias. And my response to that was, well, you can't get better confirmation bias than what you see in the scientific literature, because they only will publish things that they already agree with. So if you've got a creationist perspective, all the best with trying to get your scientific paper published in their journal. I mean, that's confirmation bias at the extreme, if you ask me. And yet this Sir Paul Nurse, who's a Nobel laureate, in this article that we've been referring to in this program, said there's no harm in discussing things. Well, apparently there is, if you want to discuss design and a designer. You know, so I'd like to see him follow through with that sort of thinking and allow people to discuss other alternatives to the failure of evolution to explain anything.
Good point.
Brilliant. Well done, Craig. Yeah, that's really well done. Right. Okay. So the comments and questions have been pouring in. I have been inundated with certain things. So I am doing my best in terms of questions. I do apologize if I have missed any of your questions off of answering, because there are that many. We will have to come back to a lot of them. But that's fine, because we will save them for a Q&A. It's all good. Don't worry. You will get your question answered. This first one for our last Q&A session comes from Marianne on Facebook, and they said, Diane, has your luggage been recovered yet?
Yes, the good news is my luggage has been found. The airline gave no explanation, but from looking at the dates that were on the plethora of paper tags that were attached to it, I think it got caught up in that great luggage disaster they had at Heathrow Airport. I don't know whether you saw on any of the news reports pictures of sort of great masses of luggage at Heathrow Airport. And apparently they systematically worked their way through it, sent the luggage back to the various airlines that owned it. Fortunately, mine did actually have a tag on it that identified it as belonging to Qantas as well as belonging to me. And so it didn't leave Heathrow Airport for a couple of weeks after I did. But yes, it eventually has arrived back to me, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm very grateful for all of those who prayed about that and supported me through this. So thank you very much.
Praise the Lord. Miracles are everywhere. There we go. Right. Okay. So another question here. This is from Doki Doki. How to respond to, even if evolution weren't true, it doesn't mean creation is true.
Well, that's actually a good point. Knocking holes in somebody else's theory does not make yours right. And so that's why at Creation Research, we try to do more than just knock holes in evolution. Excuse me. We do want people to look at the scriptures, because that's what we're on about. So, all right, if this is true, if what the Word of God says is true, what would the evidence be? and the evidence is there. So all of those processes that the evolutionists talk about, natural selection, mutations, chance random processes, that diversity that Craig was talking about, those are all real processes, but they are actually better explained by the scriptures. So that is a good point. Knocking holes in somebody else's theory doesn't make yours right. So what we are saying, all right, if you are avoiding believing in the scriptures because you think evolution is true, we do knock holes in evolution to try and crack that facade. But we want people to take that extra step and say, all right, if that's not the truth, what is? Well, go and read the scriptures and see what it says. Craig and John, you might like to
Well,
add
one of
to
the great things about this article is that they're knocking holes in their own arguments.
Yes.
They're actually arguing that themselves that they can't come up with the answers. So we don't even have to do it. We're just revealing what they're already saying and acknowledging.
That's true. But the one thing they're not doing is asking, well, if God created everything, what would the evidence be? And remember that God is the God of the Bible who told Joshua to tell the people of Israel, come now, let's reason together. So even though your intellect, your will are all limited things, they're not limited beyond the answering of that question. Come to the Lord, come to me, let's reason together about these things. Hence, if you look at Creation, the Final Proof, which was a film that we made at Griffith University, very unpopular with the atheist and the agnostic authorities there, but it asked that question. If God, the intelligent one, if God, the Word, was absolutely vital to the creation of life, then here's what you would expect. Matter plus time plus energy, the evolutionists' key ingredients, can't organize themselves at all. They cannot improve their information level, but you add information from the outside, and this is not only true of the creation of life, it's true in Ed Nealon's DVD, where he does that as well. How could you organize carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, etc., so you end up with an organic molecule containing information? His answer, you only put the information in from outside. It is not self-generated. And if information in the product is greater than information in the parts, then you've established the presence of an information source, and information is only originated in mind. Hence, God, the Word, is the one who gave it. So you can actually do this. So what I'd encourage you to do is admit that that's true. If evolution weren't true, then what's the options? Philosophers have argued over this forever, and in reality, after hundreds of thousands of pages of books and theses, etc., they end up in two camps. Either there's a God who created it, or it happened all by itself. There is no other options. Go for it. Try and think. But then you want to go one step further and say, okay, the God of the Bible says he created. Here's my Bible. Tell me what evidence you'd expect. Right now, what you find is they don't want to look at the Bible. There's your first problem. Number two, if they do want to look at it, they've never looked at it before. Number three, they don't know what it says. So you can do what I did, because it struck me as I read through my first evolutionist textbook that brought me to Christ by challenging God, by challenging creation. It occurred to me that he was poking fun at the Bible. So I picked up a Bible to see what it said. And it said 10 times on the first page you read. You start the Bible from Genesis, not Matthew, where many Christians think. And in Genesis chapter 1, it says 10 times. He made things to produce their own kind. He didn't make things to evolve. So if I find fossil trees, fossil maples, fossil tree ferns, then no matter how long they've been here, and like Craig argued, I didn't know how old the world was or how young it was in those days. If the tree ferns had been here 120 million years, they should have turned into tree ferns. Hey, I knew that was true. I'm a geology graduate, right? I knew all of this stuff, and it did not fit evolution, but it did fit Genesis. Of course, in the end, I had to cave in on all the millions of years too, but that really didn't affect the nature of the creation. Creation is true. If I've got a table I've dug out of an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb area, right, and the evidence that was a created table will be just the same 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, as it would be for a table from Amart down the road made last week, right? So the evidence is not time dependent. The evidence is actually the evidence against time. You can't take time to make a table, otherwise the wood rots. So it is easy to answer so many of those questions. The first part is correct. If evolution wasn't true, it doesn't mean creation is true, but you'll then need outside help. What creation are we talking about? Here's what the Bible says. Now let's think this through. Anything else, Diane, you might want to add to that?
Yes. It's if evolution isn't true, you then have to take the next step and say, well, if that's not true, what is true? And go and look for it. Now, sadly, some people do go off into mysticism and things like that. They want to escape from the real world. But the Bible clearly says that God is the God of the real world. So if evolution isn't true, there still has to be an explanation for the real world. And God is the God of the real world. It starts off in the beginning, God created. Therefore, there should be evidence for that in the real world. And as we've seen in the various museum displays and fossils that even we've just looked at tonight, and some of the previous programs that we've done on design and on fossils, there's plenty of evidence there out in the real world. So go out, study the real world, but also look at the scriptures and see how they fit together.
Yep. I love one of the questions that John posed to me many years ago. That's a good one for people that don't accept a creation to ask themselves. For creation to be true, what evidence would you accept? A lot of people haven't thought to that level. What level of evidence would I accept for for creation to be true? Think about, maybe that's one Ravi should think about. What evidence would I accept? Because if you're in a mindset that's blanking out any evidence at all, then you're never going to get there. But if you can sort of have some boundaries as to what you'll accept, then maybe you'll see that it actually fits.
I'll add one thing to that, to Craig too, because the dilemma that we're facing is the same as the 10 lepers who were healed. Remember, Jesus healed them. Now, that would have been spectacular in those days where there was no antibiotics or no analysis of what this was, a bacterial disease or what it was, and yet they all get healed. How many of them came back to say even thank you? All right? They didn't come back at all, right, except for one of them. And so what you find is the guys in that experiment, miracle, call it what you like, who should have said, wow, nobody in the history of the world has ever done this for a leper. You are God. But we don't get that reaction. So the reason you don't get that reaction is in our natures, it's hard for us to admit there's a problem called sin. So if I encourage you, if you want to investigate this question, you'll have to admit, first of all, the guy you're seeing in the mirror, the girl you're seeing in the mirror, has a little bias. It's a bias against God, a bias against creation. It's called sin. And you need to bring that into your calculations as well. You know you're a sinner. I mean, you go to think something and sometimes the worst things come out of your mouth and you didn't even intend to start there. You're a sinner. I'm a sinner. It's a real factor in life. I'm going to have to leave soon to go and look after my sick wife. But again, a reminder, pray for Joe. He really was exhausted when I last talked to him. Pray as he deals with his family. Somebody asked questions about suffering and that. You're talking to a couple of people who really struggle with a bit of suffering at the present time, but Joe and his family are doing it real tough. So pray for them. Sam, I'll hand back to you and you guys can decide how many more questions that you need to do. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
No worries. See you, John.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
See you, John.
Bye-bye, Craig.
Right. Okay. Well, it's up to you guys. We can keep going or we can stop there.
Look, I'm going to have to round up just because of the where I am today and people waiting for me so they can live in the house again. But I just noticed that Ravi's put a question up. What evidence would you accept for evolution that contradicted the Bible? That's a big question. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of that today. Even the evolutionists are seeing problems with all their theories about what evolution should be showing us and not finding. But it's a big question, and we certainly don't have a chance with 30 seconds left to go today.
Yes, if there are questions, as Sam says, we do actually keep a record of them. maybe we can have a question and answer session because people have sent in questions and we would like to answer them. But I think we've run out of time tonight to deal with those issues. But we would like to deal with them. So maybe we can.
I've saved the questions, so we can definitely come back to them another time. There's one final quick one that I will deal with before we go. When can we schedule the first debate, Sam Jenkins? Would you debate Indiana Jones' opponent Snake was right? I am on nowhere near the level that Joe and John are at, or even Craig, in order to do a debate. So I probably have to still brush up quite a bit before I probably be debate worthy. But I wouldn't rule it out in the future. If I was at that level, then sure, why not? But as of this moment, not quite there. But there we go. Right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your wonderful questions and your very, very, very lively chat. It's great to see everyone interacting. And thank you so much again for John as well, and also Diane and Craig as well. Thank you so much for being here. Any other final words to say?
No, I think the discussion was great.
Come back again next week.
Yes, certainly. Come back again next week. Right. Cheers, guys. Thank you so much.